What the city is talking about.
The news that impacts you.
Welcome to the Montreal Now Podcast.
So it's not the kind of thing we usually might discuss here, but it's an interesting story, and it seemed like pretty good time to be talking about this. There is a piece in the Globe and Mail dealing with estate planning, but the part that really stood out to me was the part where our next guest, his name is Tim Cestnick, discusses things that you might not consider, or perhaps you should be considering higher on your list if and when it comes time to prepare, when it comes time for estate planning. And they are what are called the 3Ds. So let's find out more. Tim Cestnick is a chartered professional accountant, co-founder and CEO of Our Family Office, Inc. in Toronto. Mr. Cestnick, thanks for being here. Appreciate the time. Can I start with the 3D elements here, which I found really interesting, including and I'm going to get to document in a sec, but the part about discuss, why is that so important and with who?
Well, that's a good question. And, it's something that, documenting, which is another D, is something we all do really well. We prepare wills or mandates, and we make sure our paperwork is in order. But quite often parents forget to discuss these things with their kids. Now, there's a time and a place and an age at which it probably makes good sense. But you don't want to hide your estate plans from your kids or your heirs. In most cases, the real question isn't whether to talk to them, but when and how and what to share. So, simply handing over a copy of your will is not really a substitute for a good conversation with them.
It's funny as you say that. I can't help but think that with the idea of discussing, maybe some people think discussing would be the worst thing you can do because all that does is potentially create a situation where, you have one sibling who doesn't care or doesn't like what you did, and you set up sort of a confrontation more than anything else.
Well, the confrontation, if it's going to be there, first of all, it's your money. If you're the parent, it's your decision, and you're probably better off having a conversation with kids and explaining why you're deciding what you're deciding, even if you think it's not going to sit well with everybody. Because if you're gone and some of the kids aren't happy, you'd hope that no one would take legal action, but it does happen pretty regularly. So at least if you've explained your rationale or why you're doing things, your intention, it can actually avoid hard feelings and can actually lead people to accept everything when you're not around.
I think this is very funny because as you say this, I'm thinking, you know what? If you don't discuss it and eventually you pass away, you don't care because they can work that out on their own. You're no longer involved. So you've removed yourself from the equation. But I appreciate that's not what you're supposed to be doing. But I bet there are people who think, let them worry about this when I'm gone. I don't want to worry about it now. I don't want to start the trouble now if there's going to be any. But
all you need to do is talk to a few lawyers and accountants about horror stories they've heard about estates that went wrong. And it almost always comes down to just lack of communication from parents before they left, before they were gone.
Can I touch on that, though? When you talk about that after the fact, right? Let's say you've left a will. Your plans are pretty well laid out. When you talk about, fights that come up after the fact, if you have a notarized will and it's legitimate and everything's there, what is there to contest?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's about, parents can say in their will, divide everything 3 ways. If you had 3 children, for example, divide everything 3 ways. Everybody gets an equal amount. But what happens if the biggest asset they own is a cottage or second piece of real estate, and now somebody in the family wants to keep the cottage. The other 2 say, well, how do we split that 3 ways? And, the plan is not clear. And then if one buys the other 2 out, how do you agree on a valuation? All kinds of things can come up depending on what you own. If everything you own was just cash in the bank, it's easy to divide 3 ways. But the more complicated your affairs are, maybe the more real estate you have, or if you have a private business or other things, the more you really need to plan ahead and talk to your heirs about what's going to happen and get their input. Doesn't mean you have to listen to them, but get them to provide their thinking and make sure everyone's clear on what plan's going to happen, what's going to take place when you're gone.
Okay, fair enough. If I can go back, I don't want to run out of time. Let me start with the top one. You mentioned document. What is it you should be documenting here exactly?
So there are 3 key things you need to document. First is having a will, because if you die without a will, then the province steps in and dictates who gets what. And that's not usually very good, because it's not only is it, it's probably not who you want to get the assets, but also you can end up paying more tax than you should. Because, leaving things to a surviving spouse, for example, is the easiest way to avoid tax. But that won't happen if you don't have a will. Second document would be mandates or powers of attorney, or what we call, or mandates in Quebec, which are really instructions for what your not your executor, but your attorney should do if you become incapable of making decisions for yourself. So
Right.
you can't make health decisions, or you can't make decisions about your finances. Someone else has to decide for you. That just gives somebody else the power to do that, and you can name that person. And then the last document I think is really valuable. It's not a legally binding document, but it's what we call a letter of wishes. It's where you provide all kinds of important information to your family if something would happen to you. So it can be things like a list of the assets that you own, or a net worth statement, or it could be maybe instructions about your funeral arrangements, or personal messages you want to leave to family, or guidance you want to give to trustees or guardians. You name someone to look after your kids. Well, is there anything you want to say to those people about how to raise your kids? It's these kinds of things that are really important. It's not in a will. And so having a letter of wishes lets you spell out all kinds of things like that that can be really valuable to people who survive you.
Okay, the last thing I would bring up, and I'm pretty sure I've seen ads for this, right? People may say, well, it's expensive to get this done, get a lawyer, notary, whatever. There are people who offer to do this for you online. Now, I appreciate you're in the business. How good an idea or bad an idea is that to get this done online?
Well, I think a will that you can do online yourself is better than not having a will. It's better than dying intestate without a will. But the more complicated your affairs are, if you've got a business, you have some real estate other than just your home, I think it'd be really wise to get a lawyer involved to help draft these things, because you can never cover off all the little nuances that you might need to be worried about through an online app or some kind of app that's going to prepare your will. Again, better than nothing, but the more complicated your affairs are, it's worth paying something to have a lawyer to draft this for you properly.
This is kind of a you get what you pay for scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And the last thing you mentioned is distribute, which is about what?
So there's different ways of actually distributing your assets to the next generation, to your heirs. One is through naming beneficiaries. So on your life insurance policies or pensions or RRSPs or tax-free savings accounts, those kinds of accounts, you can name beneficiaries. You can also do it through joint ownership, where you jointly own an asset with somebody else. So when you pass away, the asset automatically goes to the other person. You can do this through more complicated means. If you have a business, you might have a shareholders agreement, which talks about who gets the shares of your company if something happens to you. And then, of course, there's through your will, which is the most common document. It needs to be prepared as we talked about. And also keep in mind, too, that fair doesn't always mean equal. So, if you're not leaving everybody in your family an equal amount, your kids, that's especially a case where you want to have a conversation ahead of time. And the last thing is, in terms of distributing assets, you can also give some stuff away during your lifetime as well. You might want to see your kids benefit from some of these things you're going to give them, maybe while you're still alive. That can be a pretty enjoyable thing too.
Last thing before we run out of time, if I can, what's the mistake that you see most people make outside of not having the will? What would be the next most common mistake?
Well, not updating their will at critical times. So for example, you should be looking at your will at least every 5 years to see if it needs to be revised. And it probably does something needs to be changed every 5 or 6 years, probably. And especially if you go through a marriage breakdown, you go through a divorce or a separation, or maybe there's been a birth in the family or a death in the family, major events in the family like that usually causes a requirement to change your will, right. And people forget about doing that all the time. All
right. Good advice. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate your time.
Yep. Thanks, Aaron.
Take good care. If you want to read that article, by the way, it's in the Globe and Mail. Tim Cestnick, chartered professional accountant, with some good advice there, I think. And to what he said, yeah, I know there are people now, services that provide this kind of stuff, like online. But as I said, it's one of those situations, you spend a couple bucks more, maybe it's a better idea, depending.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Bringing you the breaking news and the people making it. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand, CJAD 800.
So there's been so much talk, of course, given the fact that Mark Carney, the Canadian delegation, were over in China and came back with a deal to bring a fixed number of Chinese EVs, electric vehicles, into Canada. And reaction, of course, from the auto industry here. But Then there's the question, and this is really an interesting take, because while we're all so focused on these cars, and I believe the number is they'd have to be under $35,000 Canadian, so it's not all of the Chinese EVs. Some are more expensive, but this particular group of them. And people complained, about a lot of different things that would hurt the auto industry here, even though the Prime Minister said it really represents only about 3% of the cars sold. But then the issue came up in a piece I just read, suggesting, while we assume, or we're told that these are cheap cars, we assume that they can't be very good because, to go buy a comparable car here, like a Tesla, for example, which costs literally twice as much, maybe even more, the tech can't possibly be as good, right? Otherwise, how could they sell them for so cheap? Turns out that may not be the case. Lorraine Sommerfeld is a reporter for Driving.ca. Has been writing about cars for the last, 15 or 16 years and is on the line. Lorraine, thanks so much for your time today.
No, anytime.
So let me get into this because I know that quote that really sticks out, and I remember seeing this at the time when the CEO, believe it or not, of Ford, who had been driving one of these cars and said, I've been driving this for 6 months now, a Chinese EV, and I don't want to give it up. So in essence, saying, I guess the quiet part out loud, their tech is pretty good.
The tech is outstanding, and the Canadian Auto Dealers Association, they took 12 dealers from across the country on a field trip to China last year. Every single dealer is quoted in their piece, mind blown. They're like, we can't even get close to this. And Farley, as you said, the CEO of Ford in the U.S., he has gone on to say a lot more than I didn't want to give it back. Mm-hmm. He is saying we're going to be toast because we can't compete with this. And it was just very eye-opening to me because whenever we see the headlines about bringing in Chinese vehicles and people are freaking out, especially a lot of dealers, I think it's going to come down to not about cheap cars. It's going to come down to the fact that consumers want reliable cars. They want better cars than what we're getting. And we've never paid as much as we are right now.
Right.
And we're getting less reliable.
I think you mentioned in your piece as well, talk about, reliable Ford, since we're talking about Ford. What, they have 15 recalls over the course of a year?
110.
110?
110 in 2025. It was a record, not the kind of record they want. Yeah.
So there you go. And as you said, that's happening while the price of cars and trucks continues to climb.
Yeah, well, between 2019 and 2024, the average cost of a car in Canada went up 60%. 60.
Yikes.
Which that's why it's bigger than your mortgage payment in some cases, like it's obscene. And the quality, because I believe the tech is being pushed out before it's ready, every manufacturer is struggling. Like there's way more recalls than I recall from 10 or 15 years ago. Doubled up on the word there, sorry. So I used to defend recalls. It's like, a manufacturer's getting ahead of a problem. Don't freak out. Take it in, get it fixed. Well, now we can't keep up. There's too many recalls. The stuff's being pushed out before it's ready, and consumers are the ones paying for that in not having a car for months and things like that. Yeah. When you buy a new car, you really think it should be okay for a long time.
Well, so what's this? I mean, what do you think will happen as a result of the Chinese situation where we bring in these EVs and people discover, because when I asked the question of our listeners one day and said, hey, if these cars come here, would you buy one? I would say much more than a majority, almost everyone said absolutely. If they come in at that price and we can buy them, why wouldn't you? Why would you spend twice as much to buy one that just was manufactured somewhere else?
Well, I think we have to throw a little bit of a flag on a play here. They're not going to be cheap. Like we see $10,000 in China for some of these. They're not going to come over here and land and be that cost. I think what we have to acknowledge is that 49,000, they didn't pull that number out of thin air. That's about how many we brought in from China in 2023. 44,000 of them were Teslas that were built in China.
Right.
Volvos are built in China. Polestars built in China. So that number came from what we were already bringing in from Chinese cars. And yes, the goal is to bring in EVs that are, we're going for that 35,000 mark. It doesn't mean you're going to get a $20,000 EV.
But even if you got a $40,000 EV, that's still half of what you'd pay to buy a Tesla.
I agree with you. And that's why a lot of people, even people that are, I call them, you'll get my ice out of my cold dead hands, even they're going, oh, maybe, because again, the cost of all cars is so astronomical. Consumers are looking for a break. And with an EV, you don't have the fuel costs, and the Chinese tech is so far ahead of North American tech that the cars are better for the most part. And hopefully we can build them here.
Well, okay, so
for Hyundai to build here.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand that. It seemed to me, and I remember noticing at the time when Mark Carney made that announcement about bringing these Chinese EVs here, he also said they were in the process of, and he didn't say a deal had been done, for the Chinese to somehow end up doing some kind of manufacturing here. Is there more on that, or do we know what that means?
We don't have details on that yet, but because of the way the auto industry is global, we know that. We also know that Ford, Stellantis, and GM have been fading out of Canada for 25 years now. They're just a shadow of what they were. We still want to have an auto industry. Toyota and Honda are our leaders, but it's not that we're trying to pick on GM or Ford. They have left us. They've gone. They're American car manufacturers. They're leaving. We need to replace them, and we have to look forward. The same way in the 80s, we let Japan in, build here. Now Japan, no one gets all cranky about that. They think it's amazing. So we have to evolve and go forward in this global industry, and let's see who we can get to build cars here. We have great car makers here. Our people are skilled. The tech is amazing. The resources are there. So it's not about, kicking Canadian jobs to the curb. It's about evolving those jobs and keeping the industry strong, because it's fading. We can't rely on those three manufacturers. They're American. That's their interest. That's what they're doing. They're taking care of themselves, not Canada.
I read the other day that we're actually making half as many cars now as we did 10 years ago, actually producing those cars in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah, we're down to about 1.2 million, and at peak it was 2.5 or 2.7 back in 01. So it's just over the last 25 years. When we signed NAFTA, that was the worst thing for the Canadian car industry, because all the jobs, we have high-paying jobs here. Well, they all went to Mexico. And the numbers are almost identical. What Mexico gained is what we lost, because they have cheap workforce.
The one thing I did hear, too, is you say that, and I think to myself, the argument against the Chinese buying or doing anything here manufacturing-wise is, well, hey, in China, you can build one of these because you're paying workers next to nothing, where if you came to Canada to build, we have unions here, we have minimum wages here. How would that ever happen?
Well, the same way it had to happen with the American manufacturers and the Japanese manufacturers. This is how we run our car industry. And in the U.S., even though they're repatriating a lot of jobs to the U.S., it's into red states that have no unions, like Kentucky and Louisiana. So even though, the U.S. is like, we're breaking all these American car manufacturers home, it's not to Detroit. It's not to traditional, areas where we do car manufacturing. It's to states that have very weak regulations and no union. And they're not great jobs. They're not the jobs we're imagining for a car industry.
So how do you imagine, when this comes to fruition, how does this play out in your mind? Canadians will be accepting of these cars simply because they're less expensive and the tech is really good. So that's enough motivation to buy one. And then what?
I think that's enough to get people talking. I think we have to look a little deeper than those kind of headlines, and I think it's dangerous to say, hey, cheap cars for everybody. I think that's bad. This needs to be a multi-pronged thing, which is what I think the feds are doing, which is about jobs, other manufacturers, battery plants. We have resources. We have a phenomenal skill set here, and our universities are amazing. So it's looking ahead in this industry, and it's not just, hey, everyone gets a cheap car. That's what's going to get people into the conversation as consumers, but I think they're also going to be kind of turned on by being promised reliable cars.
Listen, it's fascinating, and we're heading in that direction. We know these cars are coming, and we'll see how things turn out. Lorraine, thanks so much for your time today. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take good care.
The very latest news, reported and discussed. Welcome back to Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
Dr. Chris Labos, cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology and a regular contributor here on CJAD. And by the way, you can catch him Sunday on Weekends with Joanne Vrakas at 7:20. Is with us this afternoon. Chris, welcome back. Thanks for coming on. And let me begin. I saw this story yesterday literally everywhere on social media, which made my first reaction, hey, I wonder if this is true. So I want to make sure that, we're on top of this story because, as I said in the tease here, this would be a remarkable breakthrough. New study with a potential cure for pancreatic cancer. So tell us more.
Well, right. So here's the thing. Pancreatic cancer, one of the most fatal cancers that's out there, because there isn't really a good therapeutic option. There are obviously, there are things you can do in terms of chemotherapy, but the survival rate is quite low. So any new advancement is potentially very, very efficacious. This current study that was published was showing that when you use a combination of 3 drugs that are all part of the RAS inhibitors, this is this new class of cancer therapies that you might have heard about. They're sort of relatively new. they are not that successful because part of the problem is that the cancers tend to develop a resistance against these therapies. And what this current study did was it showed that when you use 3 different RAS inhibitors that work at different stages of the genetic pathway, you get a much better result. You can induce remission in pancreatic cancer. So very, very sort of encouraging results. The one caveat, this was an animal study. This was not actually done in humans. So not everything that happens in animals can happen in humans, but it is sort of an interesting proof of concept that the main limitation to RAS inhibitors, which has been resistance, could potentially be overcome by using a combination of therapies together. So
maybe it's an unfair question to ask, but so you take this and, the idea again, it's a study in animals, not in humans. We attach a timeline when something like this happens. Is it a matter of years before we see something like this actually be proven?
Yeah, it is. What most people don't understand about scientific research, it's not the doing the study that takes a long time. It's getting the funding. It's organizing the study. It's recruiting patients. So a lot of scientific research is weirdly bureaucratic. So if you and I today decided that we wanted to launch a study to do this, the first thing we would need to do is get money. And so you have to apply for grants from the government. They do these grant applications a couple of times per year. So even if we were successful the first time out, which is rare, it would take us maybe about a year to actually get the money. Then we would have to start the trial. It would take us maybe 2 or 3 years to recruit enough patients because there's not that many patient volunteers out there and there's not that many cases of pancreatic cancer. So because of all the steps that are involved, by the time we actually got enough patients and gave them the medication and waited to see if there would be an effect, it would probably take like 5 to 10 years to actually do a large enough study to actually prove that there was in fact a benefit. So now I would think that a large, pharmaceutical company of some kind looks at a study like this and says, okay, there's something here. It's worth spending obviously the money. And is that you imagine what would happen next? Yeah, probably. I mean, there's 2 main sources of funding. There's government funding and then there's private industry. I mean, certainly if you could establish a benefit for pancreatic cancer, that would obviously be, very profitable for the pharmaceutical company. So there's certainly an interest there. It's always harder to get companies interested in diseases that are less common because there's just less applicability to them. So pancreatic cancer, I mean, you do see it, but it is one of the rare cancers that are out there. So it's always a little bit harder to entice the pharmaceutical companies to pour money into it with no sort of guarantee of a return on investment. That's where sort of government funding tends to be the more reliable source because you remove that commercial aspect of it. The problem is that when the government is cutting budgets, scientific funding tends to be one of the first things to go. I wonder, too, we heard a story a couple of weeks ago, I think we might have talked about this as well, where there are certain cancers now more prevalent in younger people than we've ever seen them before. I'm not sure if pancreatic cancer falls into that list, but did we talk about, when you see something like that and a larger segment of the population who were previously untouched by cancer are now succumbing to this, you kind of wonder, is there, because not enough research is being done, why would this be happening? So the cancer in general thing is interesting. It's primarily being driven, it seems to be mostly in sort of gastrointestinal cancers, and it tends to be more of a global phenomenon, not us here in Canada. And there is some suggestion that the shifting diets in the developing world and the increasing rates of smoking are contributing to that as well. So a lot of cancers are environment related. So, how we eat, how we, live our daily lives, the fact that we're more sedentary. All of that is playing a role, but you're seeing sort of an outsized impact of it in the developing world where, the screening and prevention programs are not as developed as they are here as well. So it's certainly a consideration here in Canada. And of course, this ties in with a report that just came out today where they say about 8 out of 10 Canadians do not eat enough fruits and vegetables. And this is Canada where we have more than enough resources. So we are not great at eating healthy diets. We're becoming a little bit more lax about it. Overall, cancer rates are down in this country because we smoke less. But, that good is sort of masking the fact that we are not great about, our active lifestyle and eating healthy. We tend to do not so well on those things.
We'll leave it at that. Chris, appreciate your time as always. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Take care.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Because you don't want to miss a thing. Montreal Now on CJAD 800.
Time to say good afternoon to Chris Dimakos, our CJAD 800 legal contributor. And Chris, I said before we came on, just before the news, I don't think I've ever heard of this before, the story you're going to talk about, but that's what you wrote. This is a story that you've heard. An employer warning an employee to stop coming in early. You made this up, right?
No, this is an actual judgment that was rendered here in Canada.
No.
Yeah.
All right, let's hear the story. This is great.
So you have an employee that decides to show up every day about 45 minutes early. And the reason for that being, I guess it's just a logistics thing, travel, traffic. They want to get ahead. So they show up early every day. They log on to their computer, and they start working early every single day. And the employer says, listen, I don't want you to come in early anymore because we've had issues in the past where some employees were saying that they worked overtime. We don't want to have that. You start at 9 o'clock. Please come into work at 9. If you're going to hang around, have a coffee in the parking lot, but please do not log on to your computer early and start doing work. Well, the employees didn't listen to those directives and thought, whatever. I mean, I can come in early if I want to come in early. They can't fire me for coming in early. And the employer gave warnings, written warnings. The employee kept coming in early, and finally they fired the employee.
What?
Fired him. And he filed a complaint, went to the tribunal, and the court sided with the employer and said, look, you were warned several times. They did not want to have issues with overtime. You have to listen to your employer when it comes to directives that are clear, and they told you stop or there's going to be consequences, and you ignored them.
Hold on. Okay, but when you said overtime, I did not assume when you first said that this employee was coming in a half an hour early that he was doing this and claiming overtime. He just decided to show up early.
He wasn't claiming overtime. He just decided to show up early, but the employer had issues, especially with there's new laws and regulations about when employers can be contacted, employees on the weekend and nights and early. So the employer's like, we want to have a very, very clear line in the sand here. You start work when you start work. You finish work when you finish work. It's 9 to 5. We don't want to have to be on the hook afterwards because someone says, oh, by the way, I've been working overtime these last couple of months, and you never paid me for it. They didn't want that situation.
Yeah, but he never asked for that situation.
No,
so that's
never
hypothetical.
asked for it, but it has happened where an employee after the fact says, oh, by the way, you didn't pay me for my overtime. The employer says, I never asked you to work overtime.
I see.
Yeah, well, I did.
Okay.
Well, I did. So, and that's what they wanted to avoid. And what's very interesting about the court is the court had to look at what happens when an employee disagrees with an employer. Are they allowed to disagree with an employer? And what happens when it becomes insubordination, in which case you get fired and there's no severance whatsoever. You lost all of your entitlement to a severance package because you were fired with cause. And that's the case right here. And the courts were very clear about this. Listen, you're allowed to disagree with your employer. You're allowed to have conversations with them and maybe disagree. But when it comes to clear directives, when they put not just ask you to do something, they tell you if you continue to do this, there's going to be consequences, and you continue to do that, well, then you can find yourself without a job, and you can find yourself without any type of parting package if they let you go. So what's important for everyone to retain from this is, understand the difference between having a conversation where you disagree with your employer and committing what is called, from a legal term, insubordination, where you explicitly go against clear instructions or orders from your employer.
Are you telling me, Chris, in this case as well, that this employee lost whatever severance they would have accumulated as well?
Right. They left. They got fired with nothing. They got fired with nothing because whenever you get let go, and most of them are without cause, or the employer doesn't feel comfortable enough arguing that there was just cause, they provide for severance. But it's not an automatic. If the employer, if somebody shows up to work intoxicated, commits a very, very wrongful act, whether it's theft or whatever the case may be, there are cases where you can get fired without any severance whatsoever, which is another word for notice. And in this case, because the employee had the opportunity to change, and because they were clearly warned in writing and they were told about the possible sanctions if they continued to ignore the instructions, and they did so, they were left with nothing. And it seems ridiculous when you look at the facts of someone just coming into work early to avoid traffic, but there has to be a line in the sand where the law says, look, if you're getting these clear instructions from your employer, you can't just ignore them. You have to work with what your employer. There is that element of subordination that you have to maintain as an employee. And in this case, there was a breach there, which basically stripped this employee of all their severance and notice.
Wouldn't it? I was trying to play peacemaker here for some reason. Wouldn't it have made more sense for this employee who was coming in early to have a discussion with let's say his employer, and say, look, I'm going to be coming early. Here's why I'm doing it, and I'm not going to be asking for compensation here.
Right. I believe you're absolutely right about that, and I believe that happens often. But I think sometimes when there are personality conflicts, and sometimes when an employer can hang their so-called hat on a hook that they see available to them, they might just have taken that opportunity. So I agree with you, Aaron. I think in most cases, a simple conversation would have rectified this situation. And maybe you could have said, hey, you know what? If you're going to work an extra 45 minutes in the morning, maybe we can cut you some slack and you can leave early. And that usually gets taken care of with a conversation.
Yeah.
But I don't think that for some reason it looks like the personalities here conflicted more so than the judgment allowed me to perceive. But you can read between the lines. There probably was some conflict there from a personality perspective from upper management and this employee.
By the way, so you said there was a court ruling, then a judgment in this particular case. For whatever reason, let's assume you wanted to take this to, a higher court. Could you? I mean, this is one judge's decision in this particular case. If you were to lay out the facts, Chris, and say, look, I never expected compensation. I didn't ask for compensation. This is a hypothetical. They thought I might ask for compensation. Therefore, it's not fair. Is this over? Could you go somewhere else with
right.
this?
So, yeah, and that's such a good question because when you look at the ruling, what the ruling was based on, it wasn't based on the facts of what brought them to the table. It was a question of whether or not what the employee was doing was insubordination. That was a legal question. So it's a great. You just mentioned, it seems so frivolous for an employee to come in 45 minutes early and have them terminated without any severance. It just seems unjust and unfair. Wouldn't you be able to appeal it on that basis? And the answer to that is you probably will not be successful because the question that was put before the court wasn't, was this employee being unreasonable in terms of what he was doing? He didn't steal anything. He didn't physically assault anybody. He just came into work early. Are we gonna allow for this employee to be fired without any notice whatsoever because of that? And the answer is, well, the question we looked at is this insubordination? Did the employee consciously and repeatedly go against clear instructions from the employer? And the answer is yes. Yeah. Even though the actual facts don't seem that serious, the fact that you go against your employer's instructions can be serious, and you could be deprived. So, if they came to see me, I would say you don't have a very strong case to appeal this because you were informed many times and you continued. What would have been a better thing was had he came to see me while this was going on, you could have neutralized that and you could have had an email and you could have conveyed your position to your employer where you're saying, I don't want to go against your instructions, but here's why I'm coming in early. You probably would have had a better chance of neutralizing that legal consequence had you been proactive and addressed it early on instead of just leaving it go.
So for anybody listening, if you're planning on showing up at work early on a consistent basis and think there's, not a problem with that at all, maybe the rule, or I guess the advice here is based on this judgment, have a discussion with your boss because as innocent as it may seem, at the end of the day, this could cost you your job. I'm not sure how often this happens, Chris, because again, I'd never seen this before, but that's probably not a bad thing to say or to have that discussion.
No, and you're absolutely right. And the key point is here, if your employer is giving you instructions not to,
right, okay,
this is where you want to take it very seriously.
Yeah, let's say your employer also say, hey, you know what? Don't work too hard. because, it's not a good idea. You're going to make everyone else look bad. So I can't believe this story, but I get it. I get it. They tell you to do one thing, you choose to do something else, and this is where it ends up. Chris Dimakos, our CJAD 800 legal contributor. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bringing you the breaking news and the people making it. Montreal Now with Aaron Rand. CJAD 800.
All right, let's get to it. So a story comes out this week. Turns out there's about $2 billion in uncashed checks sitting idle with the Canada Revenue Agency. And of course, people say, how can I well, there's a way. Let's try to find out. David Nunes is spokesperson for the CRA. He is on the line. Thank you for being here this afternoon. So let's get into it. How difficult a process will this be for someone to find out if there's a check with their name on it from Canada, from the Canada Revenue Agency?
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me. Now, to get these uncashed checks, which are about in the number of a little over 10 million checks laying around, it's very simple. All you have to do is go on your CRA online account. Yeah. There's a little section that says uncashed checks, just right in your face. And then it's as easy as just seeing yes or no. If there is a check in there, really? Or if there's not. And if there is, it could be for multiple different reasons. All you have to do is fill out this pre-filled form, print it, write your name on it, sign it, put it back onto the system, send it in to us. And then it takes about 8 to 10 weeks, give or take, to get it back into your hands.
8 to 10 weeks?
It does take a little bit of time to process, but it's starting the process so you can get money back in your pocket. Yeah. It might take even a little bit longer in those cases, but the trick to save time, so the time saver here is that you got to make sure that your direct deposit is figured out on your account. And then at that point, we won't send you another check. We'll just send you directly to your account so that this doesn't happen again, potentially.
So wait a second. If you don't have direct deposit, is the idea you can't get the money? You're just going to have to wait to get it, and it would take longer because it would come in the mail as an actual check?
It would take longer if it comes as an actual check. So the amount of time it'll process, it'll be roughly the same. But then you have to wait in the logistics of actually getting that physical check into the mail and then into your hands and depositing it in. So that does take a little bit extra time too.
Can I ask, obviously when you said, 10 million checks are sitting around, is there a sort of area where most of these come from or have to do with, or are they just for anything and everything?
It's a bit of everything. It's quite as simple as let's say you lost your check behind the couch because you were busy with your kids one day. So that's where it kind of comes from. It could be checks related to your income tax return. It could be checks related to your tax returns themselves, the GST rebate, anything around those lines. So there's not any one specific place. It could be the climate action incentive where the issue is coming from. It just kind of stems from people maybe moving addresses, maybe change of life happens, and so it's super easy to kind of forget that these checks were laying around. So we always recommend that if you do it online and you have the direct deposit set up, we don't have to think about that just as much, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear if you mentioned it. Could this be something as simple as a tax refund, perhaps that you'd been expecting and got forgotten about? Is that part of maybe this?
You could be missing a check for a lot of money. That's the crazy part, that there could be a check that maybe just escaped your mind. And let's say you were getting a tax refund years ago and it was going to be sent to you via check. If you lost it or you haven't cashed it, it'll be on that My CRA account section. It'll show you that, hey, maybe you have $1,000 laying around that you haven't cashed in yet.
That'd be nice. So, by the way, just to clarify, when you said just go online to CRA, so I'm on the site right now at Canada.ca, and it's in English, but you need to have a CRA account. Just going on the site's not going to get you anywhere. You need to either have an account, or if you don't have one, sign on to get one, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you do need to have a CRA online account. And if you don't have one, it's easier than ever before. Long gone are the days where you need to call in and get a security code and make sure it's you and answer these questions. We have this nifty system that allows us to look at your ID and look at your face, and then using the technology to make sure and verify that it's you. You can get your account very, very fast. And then on there, you can see if you have any uncashed checks. You do have to do the setup process, and you have to, do your questions and the username and all that. But that shouldn't take too long because, if we're looking at 10 million checks and there's about 40 million Canadians, give or take, could be up to 1 in 4 people might be missing money, right? So, the odds are really in everybody's favor just to do a little bit of the work if you don't have that account set up.
By the way, just as you were talking, I went and logged in. It says account signed in. You want to know what the first message was on the site?
Ooh, what is it?
Routine system maintenance. It says due to
system,
of course you do.
Up to date.
But then it says it's going to be down. It says services will temporarily be unavailable starting at 10 p.m. on Friday, February 6th until 6 a.m. Monday, February the 9th. So all this to say, don't go on this weekend because the system is down. But that's fine.
Probably getting ready just for tax season, which starts on February 23rd. So we want to make sure that is running as it should be, and then make sure that it doesn't actually cause any delays when it really, really matters, right?
So just a note again, if this is you, you may not even know there's a check sitting out there with your name on it, but as our guest said, there's 10 million of these checks around. Go to the CRA website, that's Canada Revenue Agency. You're making it seem like it's a pretty easy log-on process now, easier than ever before, and who knows? Maybe get lucky and find there's some money sitting there for you. David, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks
you
for
bet.
having me.
David Nunes, spokesperson for Canada Revenue. Everyone's going to do this, right? We're all going to go home and try to log on and see if there's any money outstanding for any of us. By the way, there's no guarantee of how much it would be. He said, you might get lucky and get $1,000. You also might find out the government owes you $3.27. So just saying, it kind of works all ways. Be curious. It'll be a really interesting story, or a more interesting story once somebody logs on and discovers, wow, yeah, I was owed several $1,000s, and I'm sure that's probably going to happen at some point. So I imagine that'll be maybe next week or week after, assuming, of course, you can actually get on the site.
This has been the Montreal Now Podcast.
Listen live on your radio weekday afternoons from 2 to 6
on CJAD 800
or through the iHeartRadio app.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.